Yesterday was Reconciliation Day in Canada. And over the years, working as a reporter for mainstream media and just seeing a lot of big issues, like we have a lot of focus on things like Ukraine, and we have things focuses on things outside of our country. But, right here in our own backyard, there's reserves that don't even have like access to clean drinking water. So we have Eliana Bray. She's the wine ninja. Eliana, do you want to just give us a little bit of background?
I am a 60s scooper. I was adopted at a young age. And I'm from the Cahuon Cree Nation. And thanks to Lisa, I'm in contact with a whole nother family for another story for another day. But on my own reserve, I have family members that don't have access to clean drinking water. I was adopted, so I was given a chance to kind of be nourished, I guess, nurtured. So I not only am an Indigenous sommelier, I think I'm one of Canada's first. I'm a chef. I've got a company, ZY Ninja Consulting, for wine writing and judging. And I also have a brand new Indigenous culinary business called Creation Nation, which I'm just in the midst of rolling out. And so I have been given a better chance. So I'm trying to be the best version of me possible.
Well, I can for one say you're doing a very stand-up job. How long, we won't go into this backstory too much, but how long had you gone without meeting your family and going to the reserve where you were born?
21 years.
Okay.
20 or 21.
All right. And so I feel like you have a pretty good idea because you can see like the nature versus nurture. You can see what resources you had access to being adopted versus what some of your siblings had on the reserve. Can you just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so prime example, I guess, is when my first visit to my band, and this is, I have nothing but the utmost respect for my reserve, where I come from, but just even like the quality of people's houses. The roads aren't paved. It's a big mud thing in the wintertime. There's oftentimes the houses are not insulated. So last winter, when it was minus 27 degrees, the pipes would freeze up, and my brother at the time, he had no running water, period, not even water that he could drink. And everything was cold, and, infrastructure for getting what we consider basic things out to the reserve. I mean, not all reserves are the same. There's some that have lots of different affluence and resources, but ours is a smaller band. And the fact that, me versus my brother, our upbringing are vastly different. It's just something that when I go there to visit, and then when I'm continuing on in my life with carrying my family within my heart, I just feel that I'm like, okay, what can I do to sort of bring awareness to be a better me, and what can I do to help them out? And just kind of being involved and having more knowledge about the situation.
Mm-hmm. And I, again, because of your situation, you're able to see things through different viewpoints, right? And so I want to just talk to you about growing up. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Edmonton and raised in a little small oil town in Alberta called Fox Creek. And
Okay.
so their population, we always joke, it said it was like 1,200 people at the time. And we always say, oh yeah, when we left Fox Creek, they had to change the town population by 3 people. And it's just kind of funny where, we grew up where you don't lock the doors. I used to ride 12 kilometers to Iossagan Lake to get a drink of water, just, and I thought nothing of it. And then, nowadays that would never happen. And it's just kind of a very rural upbringing, but it was also a very systemized kind of, I'll say it, racist small town. And, just kind of being aware, hating my skin color. And it wasn't until I was about 20, 21 where I wanted to look into my roots. And I was always encouraged from a young age. So my mom and my dad had always given me books about, what it means like to be adopted, or, Indigenous history of First Nations people, and just trying to give me the tools as best as they could so that I could understand where I came from. And it was just the day I remember going into Edmonton, where you get your status,
Yeah.
and speaking with the lady there, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I bet you if you went to Bonneville or if you went to your band, you would know who your family is because you look like a lot of them." And it was kind of, I didn't know anything of my family at the time. And she just sort of mentioned that I had family members there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's really cool. And then, it just kind of carried on doing what I was doing. And it wasn't until meeting you and having that conversation and where everything else just sort of happened, where I really wanted to know where I came from, and having been to my band now a few times and trying to be involved in different things, I feel like I have another part of my life that was missing, and I didn't know that the rich culture of some of our traditions and history. Growing up adopted, you always feel like you're missing something, but you're very much cared for. The biological mom, she had 6 children. She was married, and 3 of us actually came from the same mother father. We do have an older brother that we haven't met yet, and then I have 2 younger sisters. So there's 6 of us in total, and I've met 4 of them. And one of them did pass away at the age of 10 on the reserve. That would be one of my other biological brother, or full biological. Ironically, I did meet my biological mother with one of my sisters, and it was hilarious. Well, I can laugh about it now, but
Just remember where you are. You can.
We were in the.
You actually named my show too.
I did.
You did. We have a
I
lot
did.
of history.
So we were in a closed ward where we were meeting the bio mom for the first time, or I was meeting her for the first time, and it was funny because at one point we were sitting kind of trying to talk with her, and all of a sudden she just gets up and runs away. And it's like, you can't make this stuff up. And,
No.
the nurses went and got her back, but it was just kind of like, oh, there, yeah, that got abandoned again.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you. Now, going back to the family that adopted you, now what is their background?
So my dad was a oil worker, maintenance work, or he worked in the oil field. So he was the maintenance manager, and basically went and was able to tinker and fix all the pump jacks and so forth. My mom was a registered nurse and a midwife, and she opened up the first clinic in Fox Creek, which years later they actually named her Nurse of the Year for the province of Alberta, and something that she's never really oh, that was just, that wasn't really meant for me. And it's like, yeah, it was. That was a huge accomplishment. So she's always had that nurturing sort of background. And my dad was always the type oh, you're cold, I'll take the shirt off my back kind of thing. And he had a garden, a really lovely garden. Growing up, we had always fresh potatoes and carrots and tomatoes. And, people will come and oh, can we borrow some potatoes? Because from a small oil town, it's halfway in between Grand Prairie and Edmonton. It's more known now for fracking in the oil fields, so it's becoming a big oil town. But it was kind of humbling because we've got 2 blue collar workers, and that was my parents. So I always knew, I'm like, okay, well, working. So I got my babysitting course when I was 11. And I found out that I don't really care for caring for kids, hence I'm childless, but I loved taking care of animals and taking care of houses. So I was doing that, at a young age. And then when we moved, I was 13 turning 14. And by the time we got to West Kelowna, or West Bank, it was known then, that's where I grew up. And that's where I graduated high school and went to OUC before heading down to Vancouver.
What was the difference for you in growing up in a small town and the racism you faced there with when you moved to West Bank?
Yeah, as a child, I've faced obviously lots of racism. I was very uncomfortable as a small girl because I was called the brown girl. And, even to my face, my dad was previously married. So we have stepbrothers and stepsisters. And one of them just would always refer to me as, oh, that's the little squaw or something. And just these really derogatory terms. I remember just feeling really ashamed of the color of my skin. And I wanted to be white because that's how I basically grew up. So I didn't have all my cultural things. And unfortunately, where Fox Creek was located, was just an hour away from Valley View, and Valley View does have a problem with lots of racism. So I remember going on, I was in track and field at the time, and we'd go on meets, and it was just like seeing how that interaction with that community was compared to in Fox Creek, like, experiencing racism. And then it's like, oh, no, it's those Indians or those, just really, really not great terms. And to see that growing up, and it was like, it was normal for other classmates to be like, oh, yeah, they can't even do this, or they can't even, run 100 meters or whatever. And I lived a very sheltered life. And so it's just kind of very different from what it is now. Because like nowadays, I'm walking around head proud, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm First Nations, I'm Cree. And yesterday I was proudly wearing orange everywhere I went. And I usually always make a point of visiting and just giving thanks, because the fact that my biological mother, the one that I met that abandoned us, she was a residential school survivor. And so our family name, when I said I'm from the Cahuan Cree Nation, our family name is John, but the original name is actually Cahuan. And the reason why it is John is because when our ancestors were put into the residential schools, they were said to say their last name, and they said, it's John.
Mhm.
And it was just because they didn't want to learn Cahuan, which means eagle. And
Yeah.
it, so it's just, that's why there's anyone who has been to residential school, their last name is John, or their family name is Cahuan.
Yeah.
Invisible last name.
Well, that's the culture issue too, is that when people, because I grew up in a pretty racist town too. Penticton was pretty bad. It was very segregated. Like the First Nations people were on one side of the town and one side of the river, and we were on the other side. And there was just so much judgment without any understanding. And when you really unpackage just the trauma and the rape of the culture, my grandma worked at a residential school, and she said, like, those people, those priests are going to hell from what she saw. I have 4 children. I can't imagine somebody coming and taking my child away. Like that, like I would be in a mental institution for the rest of my life. And that's why I just don't think that people understand just the full scope of it. I see stories too of at that time, parents weren't allowed to even visit, and
Yeah.
they would be camped out in like on fields near the schools trying to get close to their kids, but they weren't allowed access. Every single one of your First Nations friends is impacted
Yep.
by the residential schools. And
Absolutely.
as a Canadian citizen, I think it's our responsibility to be educated on.
It absolutely is. There's so many free tools as well. Like the University of Alberta has this lovely course via Coursera, and it's all about Indigenous Canada. And it's like awareness of, everything, our history, and the fact that most people don't know any of this. And, it's just, it's terrible, but the world could be quite whitewashed. And it still is to this day.
Mhm.
And I've always experienced it, which is why I always personally try to work harder, and trying to be better.
When I have the white guilt, so I have like a Nazis on one side, my grandparents. It's so ingrained in us. And I'm thankful for my mom because she was the one that really tried to help educate us. And she got her teaching degree, master's. On my last podcast, I was also talking about motherhood and how the CPS, our version of it here in Canada, will wait at hospitals of First Nations mothers to take their babies away. And we think that the whole residential thing isn't happening anymore, but it is in a different way. I do see there are, with trauma, you don't want the kids in a bad living condition, but what are we doing to change things? And how do we circle back and undo all that harm and all of that trauma and help our First Nations people reclaim their identity?
Yeah, it's a process because even yesterday, for example, there's a lot of people that don't know what September 30th is. They don't know the Truth and Reconciliation of what, they just know that, oh, I get a paid day off work. If you know any Indigenous person, we are all affected. We're all interconnected, and it's like, how can we do this? I love the fact that my own band now is putting the resources for young mothers and the tools and the resources which are now, I guess, coming around, which, we would take that for granted in the white world, but us Indigenous peoples have a hard time accessing it. Or if we do access it, it's like, oh, they get a free ride or whatever. And I've heard that quite a lot too. And it's like, no, actually, it's not. And
A
it's,
big cost. There's a gigantic
there's a
cost.
huge cost.
Well,
Yeah.
and also the missing and murdered Indigenous women, that whole the red dress. I went to the Picton trial years ago, and the amount of time it took for people to actually investigate those missing women, and most of it was the reason for that was because they were First Nations, and it was not a priority for the police. And
Yeah.
to have that kind of blood stains on our hands in Canada for the amount of people that have gone missing is disturbing.
I know that when I drive on that highway, yeah, I feel so sad. And there's at a certain point where I'm just like, I feel like I do actually stop and I just say a prayer, because it's like you could just feel, and all these women are just, who cares about them? They're living on the streets or whatever. And it's like, there's so much where the red hand over our mouth, where no, nobody ever talks about it. And it's kind of, so we wear red to symbolize that, the fact that we are always thinking about missing, murdered, and Indigenous women.
Mm-hmm. Well, just seeing those images, like on TikTok, there's lots of videos with the scream and the hand over the mouth. I feel like
Yes.
that it's
There's a
that every time I see one of those videos, I get full body just goosebumps.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's change?
It's interesting moving back to West Kelowna from Penticton, because I see nowadays where people like Anona Campy or Anona Fawn, who's a future elder from the Penticton Indian Band, she has been hired by like West Bank First Nation or Okanagan Nation Alliance to actually kind of educate people on the protocols and the ways and why we are not celebrating, but acknowledging truth and reconciliation and things that we can do. So I know that yesterday I was looking around for activities to do, and like at least in Penticton they've got a walk, and they're doing 3 years of it, and they go to the residential monument and sort of pay tribute to the elders and residential school survivors and those that didn't come home. And so just seeing that, how I've even been chatting to people like the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce or so forth, where they're like, we want to know more about Indigenous ways and history, and what can we do to help. So it's kind of, it is starting now in all sectors, but it's very slow. And the fact
Mm-hmm.
is, a lot of people are like, oh, it's just another day off, and it's like, no, this is your country's history, and it's our First Peoples history, and we need to know and acknowledge it, and also give thanks that we are here, and to acknowledge their loss and make sure it doesn't ever happen like that again. And there's just, yeah, awareness,
Well,
huge.
and I think sometimes awareness, people don't want to. They want to put their heads in the sand a little bit because it's too much for people to bear just how sick and twisted what we did was. Here in Parksville, something that for me was effective, I know a lot of people I've spoken to too, was they took about 100 red shoes, little red shoes. I get goosebumps just even thinking about it. And they put it all along a fence. So everybody on the highway, on Island Highway, has to drive by all these little red shoes. And it's like, it was like a gut punch. Like the first time I saw it, took me out. Like it was really, because it's like, again, as a mother, those are the things we need to do. We need to sucker punch people a little bit to wake them up and just say, this wasn't that long ago. I mean,
Yeah,
what was it, 1996, the last residential school
96,
closed?
yeah.
I was born in 83. It wasn't that long ago. And that's so crazy to me.
Well, even like going to these monuments and reading the stories of how the kids were forced to eat food that was bad and rancid. And if they got sick from it, they'd have to eat what they had, in fact, threw up. And it's just kind of like these horrible things where all along the monument too, of course, were little shoes and little clothes, and people were bringing toys and just kind of things to honor the memory of these children that, that we lost, that are would never to come home ever again. There should never be a gravestone or graveyard at any school for any reason. And the fact that we'll almost expect to see that, which is, it's so sad. And like it always brings tears to my eyes, because it's like you just feel the souls of the young, people who got their lives snuffed out. And for why? It's because we're different. And it's like, you got to kill the Indian out of the child. I was reading some of the history yesterday of how, Sir John A. Macdonald, I can't call him sir, but he got the idea from slavery. It's like, oh, that's a great idea. Just grab all the people together and get rid of the problem. And it's just kind of, it's so devastating, the fact that, you know, not only our culture, but obviously other cultures in the world, but more importantly, this is our history. And the fact that, as you said, 1996, that was the last time that residential school was open. The ripple effects from that alone are, it's going to take years. And the thing is, a lot of people will always continue to put their head in the sand. And I find that sharing and learning the stories from the elders, most of them don't want to talk about it because it is extremely traumatizing, but we almost need to know, to acknowledge, and to help heal the nation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you were talking to, like, we made a joke about your mom and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is that lots of those kids died, but a lot of those kids grew up feeling dead inside because everything that identified them was stripped from them. And
Yep.
then they trying to somehow get back into life again. And how do you do that, right?
There's a huge need for general awareness, but general awareness as it affects like everything. And it's not just the fact that, oh, this is Canada, this is our land, that's your land, this, you're on the reserve, you're not on the reserve. It's like, no, we should be given back our ways of life, because it's like, I don't know how I'm learning Cree from like an app or from courses. And it's like, my brother, he's a Cree speaker because that's how he grew up and he knows all the traditions and all that. And it's like, I don't. So it's just kind of not frustrating, but it's kind of like, we were put in this because that's the way it's always been. And it's like, how can we better it? So again, with knowledge and education and cultural awareness and identity, I think that's huge. I know me, that's what I'm striving for right now. But it's kind of like, we need to make sure that everyone knows why this is here and what can we do to mitigate it or to acknowledge.
Well, going from nomadic to being stuffed into in Penticton, for example, stuffed into like the worst part of town with no real access to resources, and then having to just, figure out a way to survive in that little box you were given. I feel like us white people have kind of ruined everything. We could use a lesson or two on nature and respecting animals and respecting elders. You saw me with Omi. We're shoving seniors into homes, and we're everybody is so disconnected. And I feel like when I think of First Nations people, I do think of especially this respecting the elders and holding them at high esteem and
Yeah,
passing on knowledge and wisdom. We lock them away. There's no one to pass on knowledge to us. So I
yeah.
do think that is one step to reconciliation, is just finding ways to educate each other and in the ways that will bring us more together and not segregate us. Like us, chicken sisters.
Yeah.
I lured Eliana over to my house with chickens hatching, and she calls me your chicken sister now.
Crazy chicken lady, actually.
Oh, what am I saved in as your phone? Crazy chicken lady?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Crazy chicken lady, Lisa.
But look at us. Look at us. I mean, you've named my show. I found your
Yep.
sister. I mean, there's ways that we can
We can work together.
we can work together. And I love everything that you've done to, beat the stereotype and beat the, just all of this stuff that is just so tired.
Yeah.
All of it is just, let's turn the page. And I just think that having an advocate like you for Canada's First Nations is so important. And I really hope that you would just take that ninja sword with
Wonder Woman.
spread the word, spread the love, spread the wine.
Absolutely. I just wanted to say one more thing too about elders is that, yeah, our history really isn't written down per se, and it's how we get our history is talking to our elders. And so we actually did family trees at our band for another reason, but it's kind of neat to find that Jen and I, or one of my sisters, or Elton and I, my brother, we are actually descendants from the original Cahuan chief, and it's like that's cool, and it's the fact that we want to know more about that. So like, listen when they say listen to your elders. Um, it's actually true. And it's like they're a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of history, and carry these traditions. If you ever have an opportunity to meet a First Nations elder or to learn their customs, anything about them, make sure you do so.
Totally agree. And on my part, I will not do so because of the generational trauma that my elders have inflicted on the world. So I'll learn from your elders and not mine. Well, thanks, Eliana. And how can we find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find me on for wine related things at ZY Ninja. So Wine Ninja with a Z in front. So I'm that on many formats. My new business, Creation Nation with two E's. Also, you can find creationnation.ca, zyninja.com, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and the thing formerly known as Twitter. Um,
Thank you so much, Eliana. And it's so nice to see your face. And I wish I could hug you.
Me too.